Hi everyone, welcome to today's Safety and Health webcast, a new innovation framework for safety and training, sponsored by United Academy, powered by United Rentals. My name is Tom Music. I am an associate editor with Safety and Health magazine, and I will be moderating today's session. Thanks for joining us. In a few moments, we'll start the presentation, but first I want to go over some housekeeping items. The views of today's speaker and his organization are his own and do not necessarily reflect those of the National Safety Council or Safety and Health magazine. A mention of any commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not mean the Council or the magazine endorses those items. At the end of today's webcast, we will conduct a question and answer session. To ask a question, simply type it in the text box that is located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, and then click on the button for Submit Question. Feel free to ask your question at any time during the presentation. You don't have to wait for the Q&A session to begin. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible, but because of the large number of participants today, we might not get to every question. However, all unanswered questions will be forwarded along to today's speaker. For basic troubleshooting information, click the Help button located on your screen. At the end of the webcast, you will be asked to complete a brief evaluation survey. I can let you know more about that after the presentation. This webcast is archived so you can access it after today's live event. To view this webcast and all of our past webcasts, go to safetyandhealthmagazine.com/events. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Our speaker today is Jim Gibson. He has more than 30 years of capital, technical, and executive experience in the technology field throughout Canada and Europe. Jim currently works globally with clients on new ways to work. He is writing a book on the future work looking at new intersections of science, cultures, and teams that are now possible with our rapidly advancing digital plumbing. His writings and work can be found at www.jagyyc.com. Jim has his Bachelor of Commerce from the University of Toronto, an MBA from New York University, and his Certified Management Consulting designation. Jim, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Hi, Tom. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for having me today. As Tom mentioned, I've been involved with the disruption and look at technology for my entire 30 years of my life, and I'm delighted to be a part of sharing some of my observations of what's going on in the world today. I started my career in training and education many, many years ago with one of the large Class 1 railroads here in Canada, and learned a lot about the impact of technology and disruption on people who are working and living on the ground in the world of work. And I've been an observer of that through all of my career. I'm currently working with a large number of firms in the UK and also here in Canada, understanding the impact of technology on their organizations. And it's been a delight for me to work with the team here at United Academy and understand how that impacts the safety and training world, and it's been quite a journey over the last couple of months. And I'm delighted to have my colleague Ken McLean, president of Sirius Labs, here with me too, who has helped me with some of this journey. So with that, I'd like to just say thank you very much to United Academy and United Rentals and the National Safety Council. I think this is a tremendously interesting issue, and I'm delighted to be a part of this presentation here today. So with that, I'd like to get started and really look at the presentation from three parts. Our agenda today will be looking at the first part of the presentation, what I call a fresh look at technology disruption. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. And the second part of the presentation will look at something I call the innovation framework, which is, so with all of this happening around us, what does it mean for my team, my strategic response to that, my tactical response to that? How do I collect all of the pieces that are coming at us in a coherent, calm, presentable way? And then the third part of the presentation will really look at what I call examples in Monday morning. The Monday morning is something I use a lot in my work, which is, well, that was really interesting, Jim, but what do I do when I get back to my desk at 9 o'clock in the morning and have to present some of these concepts and ideas? And so Monday morning is an important part of any time we look at complex and challenging discussions. I really want to make sure that we understand what happens on Monday morning. This presentation should take about 45 minutes, and we'll leave ourselves hopefully time for some solid questions. So I look forward to answering anything I can, either now or after the presentation begins. So let's get started. One of the things that I've spent most of my life with is understanding technology and its disruption. As I said, I've been involved with the space for over 30 years, and I've seen everything from the introduction of the personal computer all the way through to the current social revolution that we see today. But I can assure you I've never in my entire career seen anything like what I've seen around us today. I love this cartoon because it really reminds us that it's both exciting, but it's also very terrifying as well for a lot of us. But I'm also very cognizant of the fact that we hear about technology disruption all the time. I think the popular press and the world around us is getting a little weary of hearing those two words together. So what I wanted to do is put a little fresh perspective on what that means. And so let's get started at looking at that. And one of my favorite quotes as I present to my team and my clients is this quote by Ray Amara, the former president of the Institute for the Future. Often, this quote is often attributed to Bill Gates, but this is actually Ray's. And I believe it very strongly that we tend to overestimate technology's impact in the near term, and we underestimate technology's impact in the long term. And I think that that's happening to us today. I think that there's a lot, as I said, popular press, a lot of discussions in all of our trade magazines, our popular press, our organizations that really get us excited about what's happening with technology. And we tend to think that it's going to happen quicker than it is. And in turn, what we often do is forget that it takes the human condition, the human institutions, a long time to absorb that. And so I believe very much that we're in that state where we're overestimating to some extent, but we're underestimating what's happening in the long term. The challenge is the long term is coming very, very quickly. And let's have a look at what that means. So the title of this slide is really, it's something that I believe very much, and it's work that I've done with the group called the Singularity Hub out of Silicon Valley, and it's their technology tipping points, and I use them as a way to frame this discussion. And so it's bigger than we think. Well, let's go through some of the ones that I think, and I won't spend too much time on each of these because I'm sure most of you know a lot about them, but I want to make some very important points about them. The first one is computation. That's the world I've lived in for 30 years as I've watched the power of the technology drive to literally a supercomputer in my hand as I use my mobile phones, the Moore's law effect of the doubling of our power. All of that you are very familiar with, but it's extremely important to keep that in mind. Second thing that we're observing, obviously, is the Internet of Things, the sensors and networks that are starting to power both our commercial world, but also our industrial world. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means in a bit. The next two are very, very interesting. The robotics and drones is fascinating, not just because of what's happening on our factory floors and the skies above us with the drones. What we're starting to see is the combination of the robotics with a collaborative framework in the cloud. So robotics learning from each other. As best practices get put in place in one factory, they start using the cloud infrastructure to speak to others. Very powerful trend. And obviously the one that we've all heard about is artificial intelligence. The amount of work and effort that's being placed in every imaginable software category is extraordinary. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. The next one is 3D printing, and I like to call it personalized manufacturing versus 3D printing because it's really not printing. It's actually the manufacturing of mixed materials from using technology that we have around us. Tremendous change happening in that world as well. The other area that the Singularity Hub looks at very carefully, which is probably the one that impacts this group the most, is some of the work that's happening in virtual and augmented reality. Ken and his team at Sirius Labs is developing tremendously interesting virtual reality training for the construction and industrial training use. So I'm very much aware of what's going on in that field. Material science, nanotechnology, excuse me, the ability of materials to be developed from componentry that is at the absolute micro scale. And then the last one is what I call synthetic biology. Synthetic biology are the trends that look at the ability of humans and machines to create biological systems and biological technology. So that's all interesting, and I think most of you have probably heard all of these or some of these. But my point, as I observe as a long-term observer of this world, is really that 8 of these are happening at the same time. I lived in a world where computational technology changed my world every 2, 3, 4 years. But now I'm starting to see extraordinary changes happening at the same time. And I would argue that we're in uncharted waters. I really remind my clients and people I talk to that this is not the same as a PC changing into a mobile computing device and Facebook getting 1 billion users. It's not that at all. This is a whole new level of change that we're happening. So that's the first point that I wanted to make. And one of the groups that I'm working with is an organization out of San Francisco called QUID. And QUID is a formal term is called a semantic search tool. And I'm working with them to understand the combinations and interconnections between robotics, technology advances in the workplace, manufacturing innovations, but also looking at the softer side, which is workplace safety reactions to these things, legislation, and so forth. So we polled 1,000 news stories between August and in 2013 and March on this space, and this is a cloud diagram that we're starting to observe some of the interactions in this space. Your world is one of the most complex and most interesting in the disruption space, and so I'm working with the team in San Francisco to do that. But the point I wanted to make to this group is that for safety and training, there's actually something more powerful going on, and actually I would argue more urgent. And I'd like to spend the next 10 minutes or so looking at why I believe that. And as I worked with Ken and his team and the United Academy, it became clear to me that some powerful things are going on. So the first thing is something that I call the consequences of combinations. So we go back to the list of the technologies that I showed you in my previous slide. If we start imagining combinations of technologies happening at the same time, so not only do we have 8 of them happening at the same time, we have combinations of technologies happening at the same time. So we start to put together, as I work with clients, the combinations such as, for example, and I just picked these at random, robotics and drones that are informed by artificial intelligence-driven software that actually fly over not built yet structures and create video for augmented and virtual reality for training. So imagine that we're able to combine these technologies into creating some extraordinary impacts. Again, maybe some of you have seen some of this. I know that in my 30 years I haven't. And so what I would argue is that it's the combinations of these new technologies have significant impact on work and ultimately on training, safety, and worker education. And I want to emphasize that point through the rest of this presentation. I want you to keep in mind that not only are we tipping, but we're tipping together with new technologies that have never been combined before. And so I leave you with that thought. The next point that I wanted to make is something that I call the law of exponential change. And this is where it gets really, really interesting. And what I wanted to just point out is that every one of those 8 technologies that I talked about is underpinned by something that you all have heard about called Moore's Law, which is basically the power of the circuitry on a chip or on a piece of individual computing technology. The number of transistors I can double every 18 months. Well, that's happening. That Moore's Law is happening across all of these, and that's an exponential function. And exponential functions are very, very powerful things. The reality is that as these 8 things are tipping exponentially, our systems of governance, policy, laws, my point number 3 here, are following what I call linear advancements. We think and act as a society and as organizations often linearly. And we're being faced with these exponential changing technologies. The gap is what we call disruption. The gap is our ability to manage and cope with the exponential change with a linear mindset. And so in the world of safety and training, this gap is where I would argue humans, workers, managers, people in the workforce are at risk. And so let's take a look at some of these, what I call exponential change and the disruption gaps that I'm looking for. And so the first disruption gap that I've observed is something that I call the institutional gap, which I mentioned, which is really our ability of our insurance, laws, policy, risk to manage exponential changing technology. They can't, and they haven't been able to do that. For example, we're looking at new insurance policies and risk management in robot, drone, AI automated plants. The risk profile on how to manage that is extraordinarily complex. One of the things that we also look at is the very, very well publicized Apple versus the FBI, as the institution called the FBI tries to deal with an exponentially changing technology, which is called mobile. And mobile, which embraces encryption, embraces all sorts of technologies. But our response to that is very, very linear. It's based on old models and so forth. So the first gap that we look at is something that I call the institutional gap caused by disruption. The second gap that I look at is something that I call the impact gap. And what I mean by that is the impact of a technology-enabled work environment, a place where we've invested tremendous capital and so forth, the ability of that environment to do harm and our ability to respond to that. So one of the examples that we saw in our research was there's an Australian mine that has invested in driverless vehicles, and they saw that the average speed of the truck in the mines increased by over 40%. But what they also saw, unintended consequences, is because the trucks are moving so quickly, the corresponding increase in severity of incident, the impact of the technology is extraordinary. So we're investing in looking at exponentially changing that, but our reaction to that is still very, very human. The next gap that we talk about, so we've had institutional, we've had an impact gap. The next one is something I call complexity gap. As we invest in the intelligence of our work processes, the injection of a trained, skilled human being struggles. As work processes change, the ability to advance the education, the training, the safety, all of those things for an individual human being is really complex. And so as, for example, new workers join a complex automated work process, and it's been automatically updated because the machines thought it was a good idea to do so and somebody has said so, the average skilled worker jumps into that environment at its peril. And so what we call the complexity gap compares the growth and complexity of our work environment with our ability as human beings to respond. And then the last one is something that I personally in my writing and in the work that I'm doing around the world is something that I call the human gap. And I have great concerns about this, is the role of the human being in what I call the unintended and causal interactions that we have in the workplace. As you and I go through our job, we meet other human beings, and we everything from around the cooler to around our normal everyday. As we make disconnected work happen through the use of technology, and as we take advantage of some of the great productivity increases, there's a gap that the human beings fill, and that's called intuition and creativity. It's tough to measure and monitor, but it's something that I'm personally looking at it as I write, is the response of the human beings to this change in exponential technology. So a lot to throw at you, but it's something that I believe very, very strongly, as I've observed through the lens of a technology person and somebody who's understood the trends. And I've looked into your world. It was very clear to me that safety and training has a tremendous role to play in the knowledge, the training, and ultimately the safety of the human workforce as we invest in this exponential technology. So There's lots been done. One of the things that I did as I looked at your world, and Ken has really helped me, and the United Academy team has really helped me look at some of the statistics here, is we've invested tremendously in the world of health and safety. The world of health and safety is a tremendously powerful and large component of our workforce. 70% growth of the construction industry, which, as I have learned to understand, is the key component of health and safety, is to grow to $15 trillion by year 2025. In the year 2025, I can't only imagine, with the disruption, exponentially changing technology, what is that workforce going to look like? We spend $250 billion a year domestically in the United States on injuries and illness. These are statistics that your organization has told me about. So that's interesting. What I observe as a capital person and as somebody in the space, I'm looking at, with my colleagues at Quid, I'm looking at the investment capital that's starting to flow into the training and safety areas. So the investments in technology companies that are surrounding this environment has grown 260% since 2012. And what I know in my world is that capital is always a suggestion and a direction for where an industry is going. So I'm looking very carefully as a capital person to understand what's going on. And I can assure you the space is really, really, really growing. And so that informs me that lots is going on. The next point that I'd like to make is progress is being made. Again, as an observer into what's going on in your world, from 1972 to now, we've seen a tremendous drop in the illness and injury rate per 100 employees. We've seen the fatalities per day drop dramatically. These are statistics from my colleagues here in Calgary called Blackline Safety that does lone worker technology training and technology. So tremendous progress is being made, but we're not there yet. I look at some of the continued disparate statistics between countries, between organizations, and so forth. So there's still lots to happen. The gaps are and also these gaps that we talked about are about to go exponential. So all in all, I think that your world has tremendous questions and answers to ask and answer. So as I look at this, I look at the questions that you and your organization, you individually and your organizations in safety and training are going to have to start to ask and answer. The one that I saw in Heathrow 2 weeks ago when I was walking through there was a big billboard that says, what happens when the most dangerous jobs in the world are made robotic? It was a poster from Ernst & Young that was hinting at a world of safety and training that is being re-examined by work processes. It was a tremendously thought-provoking situation for me as I thought about your world. What happens to my privacy when I'm being monitored for using technology, wearables? What happens when that happens? I'm lone worker safety, for example, I can monitor using satellites, but what else are they monitoring? And so there's some tremendously complex questions that I ask. And so with all of that, part one is I'll conclude by saying a couple things. First of all, I believe that the debate is bimodal. It's on the one hand, Quid tells us that there's great discussions that are happening in the news environment around the world about how cooperative robotics and part of the collaborative work environment is very positive. The new kinds of things coming down the pipe are extremely powerful. On the other side, there's some tremendously complex questions around who owns the robot? Will my job be replaced? Those kinds of things. What is the future of manufacturing in a technology-enabled world? So the discussion, I believe, is only just beginning. And so I'll leave this section one, with something I feel very profound that's affected me as I've thought about your world and I believe this very much. I believe that in an era of, and I will hopefully have convinced you that we're in an era of unprecedented technology change. I certainly believe it. We will create tremendous disruption gaps in your organization. But at the same time, we believe that the safety and training profession should be and can be a leading source of strategy and tactics to make this work, to bridge these gaps. And so if I was in your world, if I was a part of the safety and training, this would be the most exciting time of my career. It's fraught with change. It's fraught with challenges. It's scary. But it's actually a chance for, I believe, the safety and training profession to step out in front of what I call this absolute challenge, which is where technology disruption meets human beings. It's the role of safety and education to provide the framework to help understand how that works. And so I feel very, 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 I've learned actually as I've entered into your world, I've learned a lot about the human reaction to disruption. And I believe that your organizations and you individually have a tremendous role to play. And I think it's a super exciting time for you to be in this world. So with that, I'll close off on phase one, which is hopefully you believe that technology disruption is real. It's more than what you think, and it's actually a place where you can thrive as a part of your career. So what I'd like to do then is move into what I call part two, is say, okay, so Jim, I hear you. I think I believe it. What do I do about it, and how do I manage and think about this future in a pragmatic, structured way? So I've created with the world's second largest management consulting firm, work I did with their global innovation team, something I call the innovation framework, which helps organizations just collect, think about, and make coherent on kind of one piece of paper, what does disruption and innovation look like, and how do I manage, how do I deal with that? It's called the innovation framework, and it's a simple tool, but it's worked in a number of my client situations, and hopefully you'll find it helpful. So let me just walk you through this, and again, because it's part of the presentation, happy to obviously leave it with you and let you think about how it works. So really simple. As I look at disruption, there's really three stages to understanding complex strategy and disruption. The first thing is most organizations need to understand what are the table stakes, what's the buy-in to play, and it's something I call get in the game. The second level after getting in the game is that's when we start thinking about improving the game. We don't actually change the technology, we don't change our processes dramatically, we just improve them. So we get in the game, we know what the rules are, we know how to play, and then we start improving it. And it's only then that we can then start changing the game. Get in the game, think about what's going on in your world, improve the game by looking at the processes, and then change the game. And for some of your industries, this time scale may literally be measured in months. For other organizations, this is years or decades. So I'm not presuming a time frame here, but I'm giving you a sense that you have to go through these stages. The next part of the work that we do in a collaborative design session is really look at this thing called known knowns and unknown knowns. It's a framework that I'm sure many of you who've done strategy know, but when applied to disruption, it's really, really powerful. So I talk about in getting in the game, it's really about the knowns. What do I know? I know. What are the known knowns? And what are the known unknowns? The things that I know I have to find out about, but I don't know right now. And so those are very important discussion points that you can have with your team to say, what are the things we know about and the things that we know we don't know. The next stage as you start to improve the game is really to reach out inside your organization and go to what I call the unknown knowns. This is a tremendously powerful part of the framework that says, what don't I know I know? What parts of the organizations are doing things that are making tremendous leaps and changes in improving the game that may be far-flung, I may not know about it. Let's use the ability in the safety and training or in the education space to just surface and light up the things I already know, but I just haven't been able to grab them. I call that the unknown knowns. And then the last one, which is people raise their eyebrow when they see unknowns, is how do I possibly manage something I don't even know exists? Well, you don't. You don't manage it, but you create the ability of your organization to think about early warning signals, create education and connections into the thought leaders in your space, so that when things do start to shape on your radar map, you can start to understand them and move them forward. So in your world, all of this is informed by a whole bunch of things. I just threw some examples up on the top: the Internet of Things, smart machines, billions of connected devices. As we move way out into the future, cognitive computing, and ultimately augmented humanity. If those are the examples, I just thought about your space for a little bit and put those up there. In my work with clients, we come up with the informing pieces of technology that's involved with. And then once you have this radar map, you then start to understand and shape it using some common structures: governance and risks, culture and education, which is really about understanding how we teach people about disruption, process and technology. This is, if you've been through a strategic planning, which I know many of you have, so I don't want to repeat it, this is just the collection buckets of strategy and tactics as you go forward. And so what I've done with clients is you just simply map the things that you see coming at you from a disruption perspective in these categories. But the one thing I will point out, and I didn't do this for you because I don't know your world. I don't want to presume that I have all this figured out, but I'm sure you can figure this out. The one thing I will say is this last point, is that identify in your strategy design, in your framework, the one thing, what I call the planet killer or the comet, that's coming at you that's going to change just about everything. I would argue that, for example, augmented and virtual reality for the training and safety space is a comet that you need to pay attention to, that if you don't, is going to radically change how you do business. So with that's kind of an example of the framework. And so working with Ken and a couple of the other people in United Academy, we thought a little bit about the space of your world, and we came up with really 3 example strategies of getting in the game, improving in the game, and changing the game. And so in this case, getting in the game may be simply being a voice and a participant at the disruption discussions that I can guarantee you're having at the C-level suite in your organization. If they're not, there's other issues, but they are most certainly being had. But safety and training, based on my previous argument, needs to be at that table. The second, improving the game, is really about changing the metrics on safety, creating the technology investments that allow you to monitor, measure, and calculate more sophisticated ways of measuring ROI and productivity and so forth by investing in the technology, not just for safety, but for monitoring. The last one gets a bit out there, and we had some fun thinking about this one, and we kind of whiteboarded this concept that really, at the changing the game, safety and training could be redefined as really the bridge between the physical and digital worlds. You are the responsibility of bringing the best of what human beings are able to do in a physical way and making sure it's safe, it's understood, and it's thoughtful in the long run. So that's the innovation framework, and I hope some of that made sense to you. And again, it's a methodology that we've used a number of times, and we really enjoy it. So feel free to use it and let me know if I can help. The last part of the presentation is some examples that I've come up with, and my apologies in advance if I haven't found a perfect example that's either one of your firms or someone else in the industry, but it was my observation in the world that I think these are some really good examples. And then the 3 that I just wanted to quickly talk about is obviously some of the work, because I'm very familiar now with what United Academy is doing as a part of the United Rentals organization. Another group called the Human Condition Safety that I want to just briefly touch on. And then a group that I'm working with, or I've met and had some discussions, which is Blackline Safety, which talks about lone worker. And so as we look at the United Academy work, is that they've really stepped back from the training and presentation of learning environments And they said, we need to understand how we engage, make fun, and motivate not only skilled workers, but new millennials and people that are coming into the workforce and are bringing a set of learning modalities that we've never heard before. And they've really stepped back and said, we need to create training environments that understand watching, doing, and listening, but at the same time, so that we can create immersive environments that do that. They're not, they as many of you, the millennial or individuals who are coming into your organizations are not motivated by traditional forms. They need self-paced, they need engaging, they need a number of things. And so as I look through the United Academy with my disruption and digital lens hat on, I saw that they were doing some really interesting things. They were investing in the training structure itself. They were making it interesting. So I had the pleasure and quite amazing experience of learning how to operate an aerial boom lift using the Oculus Rift VR tool that blew my mind. I've never operated an aerial boom lift, but by the end of it, I got a sense of what it was all about and understood both the complexities of building training in this virtual reality environment, but also I recognized how powerful and game-changing it was to create these environments that work. And so as I observed some of the things, what United is doing is trying to blend online personal training to match the individual. Little things like being able to bring in tabs that when I walk into a workforce environment, it will automatically sense whether I've done the training that is relative to the specific machinery involved by touching the cloud-based CMS or LMS system. And so very impressed with the kinds of stuff that's going on with United. And so what I'd like to do is then with United, we moved on to another organization that we came across that was called Human Condition Safety. Very nascent startup. Some of you may know or have heard of them, but what really intrigued me was that it was an investment, a significant investment by the world's largest insurance company. So AIG invested in this firm because it believed and understood that helping workers and their managers prevent injuries before they happen by investing in the technologies that we just talked about was a way to reduce the overall risk portfolio of a very complex problem, which is risk management in the workforce, WCB, all of that. And so I like this because, and again, I'm as a new person to your world, I understand the newest and latest technologies. I don't know these folks. What I do like is what they've invested in terms of their ability to manage risk in a process that uses the best of the technology for worksite and work improvement. So very interesting organization. The next one is a group that I've spent some time with, Blackline Safety, which does lone worker technology. What I really liked about this was that they're using the investment that was made literally a decade ago in the Iridium low orbit satellite system that basically says, if you are out in the environment and you are by yourself, we will manage and monitor and enable first responders and all sorts of different interactions. Using wearable technologies, as I said, low orbit satellites and so forth. A great example of using the best of the technology was saving human lives. They're working in northern Alberta, where you can imagine, everything from bears to weather causes great stress on the workers who are doing work in the oil field safety, in the mining industry, and so forth. So great organization, really smart guys. I think they're quite well known to the National Safety Council as well. I think they've won a number of awards. Really like their approach to the human part of training. So super good. So I'd like to wrap up. We're just at about 40 minutes, and I do want to leave some time for questions, and hopefully we can add some value to your specific requirements. But the Monday morning things that I'd really like you to think about, and hopefully this makes sense in the context, is because I believe that the technology disruptions are happening tremendously quickly. They're happening faster than I think most of us appreciate, and I encourage you to really keep up to speed on where that's at. It's happening very, very quickly. There is an innovation framework, disruption framework that I encourage you to think about in terms of organizing to respond. So I think the first thing that you need to do Monday morning is you need to identify what I call a cross-functional team to participate in this human discussion, the safety strategy session. And if any of you have participated in or learned about or have understood the design thinking approach to the world, this is precisely a design thinking challenge. It's a complex set of stakeholders in a rapidly moving environment that requires input, iteration, repeat, and it needs to be thought of holistically. And I'm sure many of you know this, but I, as an observer into your world, I can assure you this is a classic design thinking problem. So Monday morning, I encourage you to create that cross-functional team from technology, from the business line, from your world, to really understand how to get in the game, how to improve the game, and understand what's coming at you. And then obviously the second, use the framework or some framework to identify and just get your hands around the threats that are coming at you. It's not good enough to walk up to the sea level if you're not there, and say the world's changing, the sky's falling, everything's changed. Everyone is saying that right now. What I encourage you to do is create a process that moves through the different stages of just what are the investments that we need to make to get in the game, to make sure that we're investing in the right tools and technologies before we start talking about some of the advanced technologies that are coming down the road. And then the last thing, I really encourage this, and this seems very tactical, but I can't emphasize it enough, is that I see so often organizations that have invested, have a strong investment in information technology and technology services that is very disconnected from the reality of what's going on in the world. And that's why I want to go back to my point about you have a chance in safety and training to lead the information technology groups in understanding the challenges of being human in these worlds, the gaps that I talked about, the complexity gaps and so forth. Information technology folks don't understand that at the way that you do. And I think that you need to participate in that discussion by being a part of that, what I call the watch team. Organizations that I've seen be successful are there. And so in summary, I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts. And the first is pay attention to the change. The change, we tend in this fast moving world gloss over, well, yeah, of course, this stuff is coming, and I read about it. I read an article in Time magazine about artificial intelligence, et cetera. It's more than that. It's exponential, so it's just beginning, and it's combining. So things are combining that we haven't even seen before. So anybody who tells you they've got it all figured out is not telling the truth. So pay attention and be respectful of the speed and the change. Second point is organize your thoughts. Get organized to manage this plan and present a realistic case to both your team, to your senior leadership team, if that's where you are, and so forth. I want to thank you very much. It's a one-way dialogue, so it's a challenge to know how we're reacting to some of the things that I'm saying. I would be delighted to carry on this conversation here, or via the combination of ways that you can reach me. It's been a real pleasure. I think this is one of the most important discussions that we're going to have in technology disruption. I will be writing about this. This has actually changed the tenor and the direction of the book that I'm writing, and I'm really pleased to have had met and discussed with Ken McLean of Serious Labs and the United Rentals and the United Academy team. So thank you very much for your time and your attention. I know it's a lot thrown at you. Thank you very much, and we look forward to answering some of your questions.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for that presentation. I thought it was really informative and easy to understand. I think it's going to help a lot of people, so thank you for that. And before we start the question and answer session, I just want to remind everyone of the evaluation survey we're asking you to complete. The survey should be appearing on your screen. Your input is important because it will help us improve future webcasts. So we'd be really grateful if you could take some time and just let us know your thoughts. If you do not see the evaluation survey on your screen, please turn off your pop-up blocker. You may also access the survey by clicking the survey button near the lower right portion of your screen. And with all of that said, we can go ahead and get to some questions. And Jim, I want to start out with one, excuse me, it's actually more of a comment than a question. It's from Adam Munn, and he says, a perfect institutional gap is OSHA and the wind energy industry. I would be curious to hear your thoughts on that comment.
Tom, can you just repeat that again?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
Well, he references the institutional gap, and he says, a perfect institutional gap is OSHA and the wind energy industry. Would you agree with that?
Oh, I think so. I think a couple of comments. It's a great point, and it's a great question. I think there is an attempt by some of the standards organizations to apply good thinking, but it tends to be grounded in a way of looking at the speed and the scope of technology change, and they apply kind of a rigorous framework for rules and regulation design, and they apply it to things that are moving very, very quickly. And so what I would argue is that the frameworks that have been developed for either rigid standards development need to be examined themselves. And so OSHA, whether that's an example of one or not, we need to challenge them to say, under what conditions have you evaluated the frameworks? Or is that a historical context to 20 years ago? Do they understand the pace and change of what's happening? Do they understand that, for example, that wind and solar, so wind power, for example, is actually being informed by many other technologies, not just the disruption of alternative energies, that some of the other technologies in my 8 that I've described are actually impacting artificial intelligence, the ability of wind-powered farms to actually be informed by information from the environment automatically. So a long answer is I would look carefully at the framework. Where is it coming from? How advanced have they looked at some of the disruptions, and are they informing themselves of that?
Thank you. That makes sense. We have some more questions coming in about your presentation. Our next question is, where is this technology going to be implemented first? Construction sites, manufacturing, warehousing? What would you respond to that?
That's a good one. I think it already is in place, and I'm sure the audience will confirm that we're starting to see the advances of happening very quickly. What I would challenge the groups to think about is the pace. And so some organizations have time. The disruption and the appearance of this technology in a particular area of the workforce can evolve over time. So I'm not suggesting that all this disruption happens very, very quickly. In some organizations, it does take some time. But in other organizations, it's going to happen very, very quickly. And I think what you need to be prepared for is 2 things. Number one, ground up. So every single one of your workers comes to work with a supercomputer in their pocket. They have powerful mobile devices that they understand the power of the technology, and your millennials are coming in. So pay attention to what some of the things that they're talking about, and then that can inform kind of your position on that. And then the second point is that technology will take hold I would argue, and should take hold in the most strategic area of the organization first. And so what we don't want is investments in particular areas of the workforce where it's a nice to have. These things need to be driven from real business needs and so forth. So if I had to put all that aside and say, where do I see it happening first? My experience says that the robotics world is changing the most, and that the factory floor and the kind of version 2.0 of the machines are starting to really get advanced. And the reason why I get interested in that is that it's no longer the machines being programmed by human beings. It's actually the machines starting to learn from each other. That's an exponential function. And so be prepared for some of that advancement. So anyways, I'll leave it at that. Ken, that's good? Yeah.
Thank you, Jim. Jim, our next question would be about the design meeting. Who would be in the design meeting, and what kind of questions do you bring to kind of get the conversation going?
So design meetings have to be driven from the business. So they have to be driven from as senior business leadership as you can. And so we rarely hold design meetings without C-level or CEO or something. So that's critical because it's a strategic discussion on it. So somebody from that side, somebody from the technology organization at the most senior level, both in a strategic sense, but also somebody who understands and is able to articulate where the technology physically is going. So some of the very detailed architectural things that is going on. So that's second. The really important is the involvement of the frontline safety people. So the people who are understanding the impact of technology on the ground. And so I'm not sure who that is in a particular organization, but we really truly need some of those folks. And then the final thing is really those people who are actually able to present this story, to be able to capture what's going on in these discussions and be able to present it back to the organization itself. So if there's an internal function, HR, whatever it is able to say, okay, we've learned and we put together all the thinking. Let's create that 1 or 2 pager that says this is what disruption in safety and education look to us. Somebody who can market internally and help people with some of their fears and concerns.
And then how about privacy concerns? So what is the debate on the privacy issues as monitoring increases? For example, I guess how do you see the balance between lone worker safety versus privacy?
This one is of all the issues that doesn't trouble me, but it's the one that is very challenging, and I think about this one a lot. It's absolutely two-sided, and I'm sure people on the call have very strong opinions one way or the other. I unfortunately am right down the middle on this one because on the one hand, on a privacy side, is that as a human being, there is a certain reaction to having unintended data collected about my world. And you just cannot avoid the unintended data collection. On the other hand, if it leads to and it involves increased safety and more morbidity in lone worker accidents or so forth, then perhaps we give up that collective right for the greater good. Very complex discussion. What I encourage the group here is to have the dialogue, because I can assure you, you will not get a single opinion on this. It is probably one of the most divisive conversations, but it's super powerful and super important. I apologize to anybody who is looking for a definitive on that one, but you can imagine we've got linear thinking being juxtaposed against exponential change, and that only creates conflict. So if I had to answer the question, have a dialogue, open it up to your employees and your people so that conversation can be had. So
I think that's well said.
Sorry, that was a diplomatic answer to a very complex question, but it's something I think about a lot.
Absolutely. Our next question, it comes from someone who says, I am a mid-level manager and do not have access to senior management. Do you have any suggestions on how to approach them?
Yeah, I think my experience tells me that we give, and again, with respect to senior leaders on the call, if you are, we presume they have more knowledge than we think. They think about their business. They're excellent leaders for the most part. They know their industry. But I can assure you that most people that I've met underestimate what's happening in the speed and the scope and the power of the disruption. So what I encourage somebody at the mid-level is to open up the dialogue on the scope and the changes that, for example, I discussed, that makes sure that the organization and the C-level is informed on the trends that are happening, not only globally, but very specifically to the industry. Don't assume that they do. And encourage the real discussion amongst your peers, if you're a mid-level manager, to come up with the questions that you need to answer. So I pose some example questions in my presentation, but come up with a series of questions that are neutral. They're not evocative, they're not leading, but they're real, true, honest questions about the role of technology and its impact on worker safety. So the answer to that question would be, number one, inform, and make sure that you get that feedback. And number two, make sure that people understand the questions that they need to ask. I think that I've certainly seen that valuable. So.
And then, Jim, is this a process for large firms only, or can it apply to firms of all sizes?
Yeah, really good question. For a small, nimble firm, this reeks of opportunity, right? This says I can disrupt, or I can disrupt the way in which I do business. I can create, because the cost and price performance of some of this technology is dramatically dropping. So I can be nimble, I can be quick, I can create a work environment that is safe and new and attractive because I've understood how all of these things connect, and I can. So on the one hand, it's opportunity for nimble small firms. So think about it, and I say think about it in an offensive way. For a large organization, it's a bit of both, right? It's an offensive and defensive challenge. We need to think about how this can actually change the game, how I can change the game. But defensively, how do I ensure that I don't get changed the game against me? So I think. So to sum up, I think that for small firms, opportunity. It's absolutely a way to differentiate yourself as a work environment that understands and moves forward.
That's great. We've got a couple minutes remaining here, time for at least one more. What sources of information are available to inform me on the technologies that are available to me? That's our next question.
There's a lot. Anybody who's really interested in diving deep and really deeply understanding the disruptions that I talked about, which I hope you are, go, and I'll publish these as well for you, but go to the Singularity Hub. It's called singularityhub.com. And the Singularity Hub is very, very advanced thinking in these disruptive areas, but it's very, very readable. It's enjoyable. It's deep, but it's thoughtful, and it's very policy driven. It's saying, so what? Why do we care? What's going on? So I really, really enjoy that one. So that's one of them. Read my blog. I don't want to advertise for that, but have a look at some of the big thoughts that I'm throwing out there. I'm constantly trying to channel this, and having spent some time with you guys, I'm going to spend a lot more time channeling it because I really enjoy it. A fun blog that I really encourage you to read is something called Wait But Why. WaitButWhy.com. And it's fun, but it really goes to the heart of some of the complex technologies and asks it in a fun way, and brings out the policy issues in a way that I've never seen before. So it's a lot of fun. So singularity.com, come to my blog. I can help you, reach out to me, or take a look at this Wait But Why. But and I'm sure you guys share amongst yourselves some of the best and the brightest. I certainly don't have a stranglehold on that. So there you go.
Well, thank you, Jim. Unfortunately, we're coming up on time, but I do want to just say thank you so much for all this information, all the resources, and I know this is going to be really valuable for our audience. Because we did run out of time, it doesn't mean your questions won't be answered. All of today's unanswered questions will be forwarded on to Jim, and your information will be there so he can get back in touch with you. And once again, I hope everyone takes the time to fill out the evaluation survey on your screen and give us your feedback. And with that, it ends today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast. I would like to thank Jim very much, along with United Academy, powered by United Rentals, and everyone who listened in. Thank you so much, and have an excellent day.